Nina Carter has spent 3 years invisible in her gray uniform, cleaning rooms for the wealthy elite at the Grand Pacific Hotel, until the day she speaks perfect Korean to rescue Ji-hoon Park from a language barrier crisis. What begins as simple translation, help evolves into a connection that defies every social boundary, challenging both their family's expectations and society's prejudices. As their forbidden romance unfolds, they discover their grandparents shared a tragic love story in 1970s Seoul, making their own fight for happiness feel like destiny, completing an unfinished symphony. This is a story about hidden talents, cross-cultural love, and the courage to choose your heart over everyone else's expectations. Before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Grand Pacific Hotel in Los Angeles as Nina Carter adjusted her gray maid's uniform. At 27, Nina was quiet and reserved, preferring to blend into the background rather than stand out. She tucked a loose strand of her dark hair back into place and grabbed her cleaning cart. "Remember, we have VIPs coming in today," her supervisor, Mrs. Reynolds, announced to the staff gathered in the small break room. "I want everything perfect. No mistakes." Nina nodded silently. She had been working at the Grand Pacific for 3 years now, and she knew the drill. The hotel catered to celebrities, business tycoons, and the ultra-wealthy. To them, she was just another invisible worker. Little did they know that Nina spoke 5 languages fluently. Her Korean especially was perfect, a gift from her grandmother who had spent decades in Seoul as a jazz musician. Nina kept this talent to herself. In her experience, people treated you differently when they discovered you were more than what they assumed. "Nina, you've got the executive floor today," Mrs. Reynolds said, handing her a stack of fresh towels. "Room 1201 needs extra attention. Some foreign businessman checked in last night." "Yes, ma'am," Nina replied, taking the towels. As she pushed her cart into the elevator, she could hear the excited whispers of her co-workers. "I heard he's worth billions. Apparently he owns hotels all over Asia. They say he's handsome but stuck up." Nina pressed the button for the 12th floor and tuned them out. Rich guests came and went. They were all the same to her, demanding, impatient, and completely unaware of the people who cleaned up after them. When the elevator doors opened, Nina was surprised to find the executive floor in a state of confusion. The hotel manager, Mr. Peterson, was speaking frantically to the concierge, while a young Korean man stood nearby, his face a mask of frustration. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Park," the manager was saying slowly and loudly, as if volume would bridge the language barrier. "The interpreter is delayed in traffic. Can you understand me?" The Korean man, Mr. Park, replied in rapid Korean, his voice controlled but clearly annoyed. Nina kept her head down and pushed her cart past them, careful not to draw attention. But she couldn't help overhearing the conversation. "Where is my meeting schedule?" Mr. Park was asking in Korean. "And why was I woken up with food I didn't order?" The manager and concierge exchanged helpless glances. "We'll figure this out, sir," the manager continued in English, gesturing wildly. "Please, if you could just wait." Mr. Park ran a hand through his hair and spoke again, this time his voice rising slightly. "I have 3 meetings today with potential investors. If they're not properly scheduled, I'm losing millions of dollars. Is there anyone in this entire hotel who speaks Korean?" Nina hesitated. She had promised herself never to get involved with guests beyond her duties, but something about the genuine distress in the man's voice made her pause. Taking a deep breath, she turned around. "He's asking about his meeting schedule," she said quietly in English, "and he says he didn't order breakfast this morning." The manager and concierge turned to her in shock. Mr. Park's eyes widened. "You speak Korean?" he asked her in his native language, his expression shifting from frustration to surprise. Nina nodded and responded in perfect Korean. "Yes, I can help translate if you need assistance." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mr. Peterson recovered. "Nina, why didn't you tell us you spoke Korean?" he asked, his tone somewhere between relieved and accusatory. "It never came up, sir," she replied simply. Mr. Park stepped forward, studying her with intense dark eyes. He was tall and handsome in an understated way, dressed in an expensive but simple grey suit. There was something different about him compared to the other wealthy guests, a seriousness that seemed to go beyond money or status. "What's your name?" he asked her in Korean. "Nina Carter, sir." He nodded slowly. "I'm Ji-hoon Park." The manager cleared his throat. "Well, this is wonderful. Nina, can you please help translate Mr. Park's concerns until the professional interpreter arrives?" Nina looked at her cleaning cart, then back at the men. "Of course," she said, though inside she was already regretting her decision to speak up. For the next hour, Nina translated as Ji-hoon detailed his requirements. He needed his meetings properly scheduled with 3 different investment groups. He needed his suit pressed for a dinner that evening. And no, he didn't want the American breakfast the hotel kept sending. Just simple tea and rice would be fine. The hotel staff scrambled to accommodate him now that they understood his needs. Through it all, Nina noticed how Ji-hoon's manner changed when speaking to her in Korean. His voice softened, his words became more polite. He thanked her repeatedly. When they finished, the manager was beaming. "Nina, you're a lifesaver," he said. "Now get back to your duties. The professional interpreter should be here soon." Nina nodded and returned to her cart, ready to disappear back into her routine. But as she turned to leave, Ji-hoon called after her. "Miss Carter," he said in Korean. "Thank you. You have no idea what a relief it is to be understood." Something in his voice, a note of genuine gratitude, made her pause. "You're welcome, Mr. Park," she replied with a small smile before pushing her cart down the hallway. Later that afternoon, Nina was changing the linens in room 1205 when her supervisor appeared at the door. "Nina, Mr. Park has specifically requested that you assist him during his stay," Mrs. Reynolds said, her expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Apparently the professional interpreter has an accent he finds difficult to understand." Nina froze. "But I have my cleaning duties. This comes straight from the top. Mr. Park is an important guest. His family owns the Park International hotel chain. We can't afford to displease him." Mrs. Reynolds lowered her voice. "Just be careful. Don't get too friendly. Remember your place." The warning was clear, but Nina had no intention of getting close to any guest. "I understand. What do you need me to do?" "He has a business dinner tonight. He wants you to go over the menu with the chef and explain any food allergies or preferences. Then tomorrow, he has those investment meetings." Nina nodded, though she felt a knot forming in her stomach. This kind of attention was exactly what she always avoided. That evening, Nina found herself in the hotel's elegant restaurant, sitting awkwardly at a small table with Ji-hoon as they reviewed the menu with the chef. "Tell him no shellfish," Ji-hoon said in Korean, "and I prefer the beef cooked medium, not the way Americans like it, all bloody." Nina translated, and the chef nodded enthusiastically. When they were alone again, Ji-hoon surprised her by asking, "How did you learn Korean? Your accent is perfect, almost like you grew up in Seoul." Nina hesitated before answering. "My grandmother lived in Seoul for many years. She was a jazz singer at the Blue Note Club there. She taught me when I was young." Ji-hoon's eyes lit up. "The Blue Note? That was a famous place. My father used to talk about it." He paused. "What's your grandmother's name?" "Ellie Carter," Nina replied. "But in Korea they called her the Black Pearl." Ji-hoon leaned back in his chair, genuinely surprised. "The Black Pearl? My father had all her records. He said she was the most beautiful voice in Seoul during the 1970s. For the first time, Nina felt a real connection forming. "You know about my grandmother?" He nodded, a smile softening his usually serious face. "My father played her music all the time when I was growing up. He said she taught him that art crosses all boundaries." Nina felt a warm glow of pride. Her grandmother had been special, talented, brave, and determined to live life on her own terms, even when the world tried to put her in a box. She would have liked hearing that, Nina said softly. Their conversation was interrupted when the hotel manager appeared, accompanied by 3 well-dressed businessmen. "Mr. Park, your guests have arrived," he announced. Ji-hoon stood up, his expression immediately shifting back to the cool, professional mask he wore with others. "Thank you, Miss Carter," he said formally in English. "That will be all for tonight." Nina nodded and slipped away, relieved to return to the invisibility of her regular role. But as she walked back to the staff area, she couldn't help wondering about the brief moment of connection they had shared and why a millionaire hotel heir would know about her grandmother's music. The next morning, Nina was called to help with Ji-hoon's investment meetings. She sat quietly in the corner of the hotel's conference room, translating only when necessary. Most of the businessmen spoke English, but occasionally they would switch to Korean to discuss sensitive matters, not realizing Nina understood every word. "We should offer him less," one man whispered in Korean to his colleague. "His family's hotel chain is struggling in the American market. He needs our investment more than we need his properties." Nina kept her face neutral as she translated, but she noticed Ji-hoon glancing at her with a slight smile. He knew that she understood the men's private comments, and he was using her presence strategically. After the meetings ended, Ji-hoon asked Nina to join him for lunch on the hotel's rooftop garden. "I shouldn't," she said hesitantly. "It's not appropriate." "Please," he said in Korean. I've been surrounded by people for days, but you're the only one I can actually talk to, just for a little while. Against her better judgment, Nina agreed. The rooftop garden was peaceful, with stunning views of Los Angeles spread out below them. They sat at a small table in a quiet corner, away from the few other guests enjoying the sunshine. Thank you for today, Ji-hoon said after they ordered. Those men thought they could speak freely in Korean. They had no idea you understood everything. It feels dishonest, Nina admitted. Ji-hoon shrugged. In business, information is power, but I appreciate your honesty. He paused. You're different from the other hotel staff. You don't treat me like I'm made of money. Nina smiled slightly. I've worked here long enough to know that money doesn't make people special. It just makes them loud. To her surprise, Ji-hoon laughed, a genuine warm sound that transformed his serious face. That's exactly right, he agreed. In my experience, the truly special people are usually the quietest ones in the room. Their food arrived, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence. Then Ji-hoon spoke again, his voice softer. Can I ask you something personal? Nina tensed but nodded. With your language skills, why are you working as a hotel maid? You could be an interpreter, a teacher, anything. The question hit a sore spot. Nina set down her fork. Not everyone has the luxury of choice, Mr. Park. I needed a job with health insurance when my grandmother got sick. After she died, I had student loans to pay off. The hotel offered stability. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean to offend you. You didn't, Nina replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. But people like you don't understand what it's like for people like me. We can't just decide to change our lives overnight. Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. You're right, he finally said. I was born into privilege, but that doesn't mean my life has been easy in other ways. Something in his voice made Nina look up. His eyes held a sadness that seemed genuine. My mother died when I was 12, he continued. After that, my father became obsessed with the business. He raised me to take over the company, not to be happy. Everything I did was measured by its value to the Park legacy. Nina found herself softening. That sounds lonely. It was. Is. He met her eyes. That's why your grandmother's music meant so much to my father, and to me. It was one of the few things that made him human again after my mother died. Their conversation was interrupted by Nina's supervisor appearing at the garden entrance, her face tight with disapproval. Nina, you're needed downstairs, Mrs. Reynolds called out, her tone making it clear that Nina was in trouble. I have to go, Nina said, standing quickly. Ji-hoon stood as well. I'll talk to your manager. Explain that I asked you to stay. No, Nina said firmly. Please don't. That would only make things worse. She switched to English. Thank you for lunch, Mr. Park. If you need any further translation services, please let the front desk know. She walked away, feeling his eyes on her back as she left. In the staff hallway, Mrs. Reynolds was waiting with her arms crossed. What do you think you're doing? She demanded. Having lunch with a guest? Do you know how that looks? He asked me to translate. Don't play innocent. I saw you two laughing together. This isn't a dating service, Nina. He's not interested in you. He's a billionaire. Men like that don't take maids seriously. The words stung, even though Nina knew they shouldn't. It won't happen again, she said quietly. See that it doesn't, Mrs. Reynolds warned, or you'll be looking for another job. For the rest of the day, Nina threw herself into her work, cleaning rooms with fierce efficiency. She avoided the executive floor and asked another maid to take care of room 1201. But as her shift was ending, the front desk called down to the staff area. Nina, Mr. Park is asking for you, the receptionist said. He wants you to help him order dinner. Nina closed her eyes briefly. I'm off duty. Can't someone else help him? He specifically asked for you. He said no one else understands what he wants. With a sigh, Nina changed back into her uniform and headed up to the executive floor. She found Ji-hoon sitting alone in the hotel's private dining room, looking out at the city lights. You asked for me, Mr. Park, she said formally. He turned, his expression brightening when he saw her. Yes, thank you for coming. He gestured to the chair across from him. Please, sit down. I'd rather stand if you don't mind. I'm just here to help with your order. Ji-hoon studied her for a moment. Did I get you in trouble today? Nina didn't answer, which was answer enough. I'm sorry, he said. That wasn't my intention. It's fine. What would you like for dinner? Ji-hoon sighed. Actually, I'm not hungry. I just wanted to talk to you again. Nina felt a flutter of something. Annoyance. Flattery. She wasn't sure. Mr. Park, I could lose my job if people think I'm being unprofessional with a guest. I understand, he said, but I've been thinking about what you said earlier. About people like me not understanding people like you. He paused. You're right, but I want to understand. I want to understand you. There was a sincerity in his voice that made Nina hesitate. Against her better judgment, she sat down. Why? She asked simply. Because you're the first person in a long time who sees me as a person, not a bank account or a business opportunity. He leaned forward. Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone? Nina thought about her life since her grandmother died. The empty apartment, the co-workers who never really knew her, the dates that went nowhere because she kept part of herself hidden. Yes, she admitted quietly. I do. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, recognizing a shared loneliness that transcended their very different lives. Finally, Nina broke the silence. I should go. Will you come back tomorrow? Ji-hoon asked. Just to talk. I'll make sure your supervisor knows it's official hotel business. Nina stood up. I don't think that's a good idea. But as she turned to leave, Ji-hoon said something in Korean that made her pause. In a world where everyone is speaking at once, your silence says more than their words ever could. It was a line from one of her grandmother's songs, a line about finding truth in quiet moments and wisdom in still waters. Nina turned back, surprised. You really do know her music? Ji-hoon nodded. I told you it meant something to me. He hesitated, then added, Please, Nina, just one more conversation before I leave Los Angeles. Against every instinct for self-preservation, Nina found herself nodding. One more, that's all. As she walked out of the dining room, she couldn't help wondering if she was making a terrible mistake, or if perhaps this strange connection with Ji-hoon Park might be something worth exploring, despite all the reasons it shouldn't be. What she didn't know was that their conversation had been observed by the hotel manager, who was already on the phone with Mrs. Reynolds. I don't care how well she speaks Korean, he was saying. We can't have staff getting friendly with the guests, especially not someone like Ji-hoon Park. Find a replacement for her on the executive floor tomorrow. As Nina rode the elevator down to the staff area, she had no idea that forces were already in motion to keep her and Ji-hoon apart, or that his interest in her would soon cause a storm that would change both their lives forever. Nina arrived at work the next morning to find a note in her locker. Report to Human Resources immediately. Her stomach tightened. She knew what this was about. In the small HR office, Mrs. Reynolds and Mr. Peterson sat with stern expressions. Nina, we need to discuss your behavior with Mr. Park, Mr. Peterson began. Several staff members have reported seeing you having lunch with him, laughing together, and spending time alone in the dining room. I was translating for him, Nina said, keeping her voice steady. That's what you asked me to do. Mrs. Reynolds shook her head. Translation doesn't require private meals or intimate conversations. You've crossed a line, Nina. We're not firing you, Mr. Peterson added quickly, but we are reassigning you to the second floor, standard rooms only. Janice Kim from accounting will handle any translation Mr. Park needs for the remainder of his stay. Nina felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Does Janice even speak Korean? She's Korean American, Mrs. Reynolds said. That's good enough. Nina wanted to argue that heritage didn't automatically confer language skills, but she knew it wouldn't matter. She was being punished, and nothing she said would change that. Fine, she said quietly. May I go now? They nodded, and Nina left, head held high despite the knot in her throat. As she headed toward the service elevator, she spotted Ji-hoon in the lobby, talking to the concierge. For a moment, she thought about approaching him, explaining what had happened. But then she saw Janice from accounting hovering nearby, clearly waiting to be introduced. Better to make a clean break, Nina decided. She turned and took the stairs instead. For the rest of the morning, Nina cleaned rooms mechanically, trying not to think about Ji-hoon or how quickly the hotel had replaced her. Around noon, she was scrubbing a bathtub when her phone buzzed with a text from the front desk. Mr. Park is asking for you, says it's urgent. Nina texted back, I've been reassigned. Please direct him to Janice. 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. He's insisting, says only you will do. Nina sighed and set down her cleaning supplies. She should ignore this. Getting involved any further with Ji-hoon Park would only cause more trouble. But something pulled at her. Curiosity maybe, or the rare feeling of being truly valued. When she reached the lobby, she found Ji-hoon pacing near the entrance, his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking rapid Korean, his tone frustrated. When he saw Nina, his expression immediately softened. I'll call you back, he said into the phone before hanging up. He approached Nina quickly. There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. I've been reassigned, Nina said stiffly. Janice can help you with any translation needs. Ji-hoon frowned. Janice can barely order kimchi. Why were you reassigned? Nina glanced around, aware of the curious stares from other hotel staff. It doesn't matter. What did you need me for? Not here, Ji-hoon said, gesturing toward the door. Come outside for a minute. Against her better judgment, Nina followed him out to the hotel's front drive, where a sleek black car was waiting. What's going on? She asked. Ji-hoon opened the car door. Please, get in. I need to show you something. Nina hesitated. I can't just leave. I'm on duty. It's important, Ji-hoon insisted. 20 minutes. That's all I ask. Nina looked back at the hotel, then at Ji-hoon's earnest face. 20 minutes wouldn't cost her the job she'd already been demoted from. Fine. 20 minutes. They rode in silence through downtown Los Angeles. Nina kept glancing at her watch, counting down the minutes. Finally, the car pulled up in front of a small, unassuming building with a sign that read, Golden Note Jazz Club. What is this place? Nina asked as Ji-hoon led her inside. The club was empty this early in the day, with just a bartender wiping down glasses. The walls were covered with framed photographs of jazz musicians from different eras. This used to be owned by a Korean man named Sam Kim, Ji-hoon explained. He moved to LA in the 1980s after running the Blue Note in Seoul. Nina's eyes widened. My grandmother played at the Blue Note. Ji-hoon nodded. I know. That's why I brought you here. He led her to a wall near the back of the club. Look. There, among the photos of famous musicians, was a large black-and-white portrait of a beautiful young black woman with a microphone, her eyes closed in song. The caption read, Ellie the Black Pearl Carter, Seoul and L.A., 1970-1985. Nina's breath caught. That's my grandmother. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the glass. How did you find this? I made some calls, Ji-hoon said simply. The current owner is Sam's son. When I told him about your connection to Ellie, he said he remembered her. She performed here regularly after moving back from Korea. Nina stared at the photograph, taking in details of her grandmother she'd never seen before. How young and vibrant she looked on stage, how confident. Thank you for showing me this, she said softly. Ji-hoon moved closer. There's more. The owner has recordings of her performances here. Original tapes he's kept all these years. He said you're welcome to them. Tears pricked at Nina's eyes. After her grandmother died, Nina had found only a few worn records and faded photographs. The idea of hearing her grandmother's voice again, perhaps singing songs Nina had never heard before, was overwhelming. Why are you doing this? She asked, turning to face him. Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. When I heard you speak Korean that first day, something changed for me. It wasn't just the language. It was how you listened, how you understood. He paused. And when you mentioned your grandmother, it felt like, I don't know, like a sign. A sign of what? That maybe I was meant to meet you. The words hung in the air between them, too intimate for two people who barely knew each other. And yet, Nina couldn't deny the strange connection she felt to this man, a connection that went beyond language or circumstance. The moment was broken by Nina's phone buzzing, a text from her co-worker. Reynolds looking for you. Says if you don't come back now, don't come back at all. Nina showed Ji-hoon the message. I have to go. He nodded. I understand. But will you meet me later? After your shift? We can come back here, and you can listen to your grandmother's recordings. She should say no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming to walk away from this complication. But looking at her grandmother's photograph, remembering how she always told Nina to follow the music where it leads you, Nina found herself nodding. I get off at 6. I'll have the car waiting, Ji-hoon promised. When they returned to the hotel, Nina slipped in through the staff entrance while Ji-hoon used the main doors. She hurried to the second floor, where Mrs. Reynolds was waiting with her arms crossed. Where have you been? She demanded. I needed some air, Nina said, reaching for her cleaning cart. For 45 minutes, do you think I'm stupid? Mrs. Reynolds stepped closer. I saw you leave with him in his car. What do you think this place is? A dating service for gold diggers? Nina felt her temper flare. That's not what happened. I don't care what happened. You're fired, Nina. Get your things and leave. The words hit like a physical blow. Nina had expected a warning, maybe another demotion. Not this. You can't fire me for taking a break, she protested. I can fire you for abandoning your post, fraternizing with guests, and creating a hostile work environment. Mrs. Reynolds handed her a folder. Your final check will be mailed. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. Nina stood frozen, the folder clutched in her hands. 3 years at this hotel, never a complaint, always on time, and it was over just like that. As a security guard appeared to escort her out, Nina felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, fear, but also a flicker of something that felt almost like relief. The job had been steady, but it had also been a cage, a place where she had made herself small, hidden her talents, avoided connections. In the locker room, as she gathered her few personal items, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Ji-hoon. The front desk said you left. Are you okay?" Nina stared at the message, wondering how he'd gotten her number, what she should say. Before she could decide, another text came through. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble for you. Let me help." She typed back quickly. "I got fired. Not your fault, don't worry about it." His response was immediate. "Where are you now?" Nina hesitated, then replied, "Still at the hotel. Leaving soon. Wait for me in the staff parking lot, please." 20 minutes later, Nina stood in the parking lot with her small bag of belongings, feeling strangely adrift. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the asphalt. She should be panicking about rent, about finding a new job, about health insurance. Instead, all she could think about was her grandmother's photograph on that wall and how alive she had looked, how free. A car pulled up beside her, but it wasn't Ji-hoon's sleek black sedan. It was a taxi. The window rolled down, and Ji-hoon leaned out. "Get in," he said. "I thought this would attract less attention." Nina slid into the back seat beside him, suddenly aware of how wrinkled her uniform was, how tired she must look. "I heard what happened," Ji-hoon said once they were moving. "I'm so sorry, Nina. This is my fault." "It's not," she said firmly. "I made my own choices. Still, I feel responsible." He handed her an envelope. "Please take this." Nina didn't open it. "What is it?" "Money," he said simply. "Enough to cover your rent and expenses until you find another job." She immediately tried to hand it back. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because I don't want your charity, and I don't want you to think I was spending time with you because of your money." Ji-hoon looked genuinely confused. "I never thought that." "Then why offer me money as soon as I lose my job?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Because that's what I know how to do. I don't know how to fix problems without money. I've never had to." The honest admission surprised Nina. She softened slightly, but still held out the envelope. "Thank you, but no. I'll figure this out on my own." Ji-hoon reluctantly took the envelope back. "Then let me help another way. My hotel chain is opening a new location in Santa Monica next month. We need staff at all levels, including management. With your language skills and hospitality experience, you'd be perfect." Nina eyed him suspiciously. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm suggesting you apply for one. The hiring decisions aren't mine to make. That would be nepotism, but I can make sure your resume gets seen by the right people." It was a tempting offer. Too tempting, which made Nina wary. "And what would you expect in return?" Ji-hoon looked hurt. "Nothing. I'm not that kind of man, Nina." She believed him, which was almost more frightening than if he'd had ulterior motives. Those she could have rejected easily, but genuine kindness, that was harder to walk away from. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Ji-hoon nodded, accepting her caution. "Where should the driver take you? Home?" Nina thought about her empty apartment, about sitting there alone, worrying about her future. Then she thought about her grandmother's photograph, about the recordings waiting to be heard. "Actually," she said, "I'd still like to go to the jazz club, if that's okay." Ji-hoon's face brightened. "More than okay." He gave the driver new directions and they headed toward the Golden Note. As the taxi wove through evening traffic, Nina felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in years, she had no job to report to tomorrow, no routine to follow. It was terrifying, yes, but also exhilarating. At the club, the evening crowd was starting to arrive. The owner, David Kim, greeted them warmly and led them to a private room in the back. Stacks of old reel-to-reel tapes and vinyl records filled the shelves. "My father saved everything," David explained, gesturing to the collection. "He always said Ellie Carter was the most special talent he ever heard. When she moved back to the States, he convinced her to perform here regularly." He picked up a tape labeled Ellie Carter, Summer '85, and placed it on an old player. This was from her last season here, before she retired to care for her granddaughter. Nina's heart raced as David pressed play. There was a crackle of static, then the sound of a piano intro, and then her grandmother's voice, rich and warm, filling the room. "This song is for my little Nina," Ellie's voice announced, "who reminds me every day that love crosses all boundaries." As the song began, a gentle jazz ballad Nina had never heard before, tears slipped down her cheeks. Ji-hoon quietly handed her a handkerchief, but didn't speak. giving her the space to experience this moment. For the next 2 hours, they listened to recordings of Ellie Carter. David shared stories his father had told him about the Black American singer who had captivated Seoul and then Los Angeles with her extraordinary voice and presence. Nina learned things about her grandmother she'd never known, how she'd fallen in love with a Korean musician in Seoul, though the relationship hadn't lasted, how she'd fought discrimination in both countries, how she'd turned down bigger opportunities to raise her granddaughter after Nina's parents died. "She talked about you all the time," David said. "She was so proud of you." By the time they left, carrying a box of copied recordings David had insisted Nina take, it was nearly midnight. Outside, the night air was cool and filled with the sounds of the city. "Thank you," Nina said to Jihoon as they waited for their taxi. "This meant more to me than you can know." He smiled. "I'm glad. Your grandmother's music meant a lot to my family, too." There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that usually takes years to develop. Nina found herself wondering what might happen if she allowed this unexpected connection to grow, if she set aside her caution and followed where it led. The taxi arrived, breaking the moment. As they drove back toward Nina's apartment, Jihoon's phone rang. He glanced at it and frowned. "I need to take this," he said apologetically before answering in Korean. Nina couldn't help overhearing the conversation. From Jihoon's responses, she gathered it was his father, and he wasn't happy. "Yes, father, I know the meeting is tomorrow," Jihoon said, his voice tense. "The investment group has agreed to our terms." A pause. "No, I haven't forgotten why I'm here." Another pause. "That's not fair. I've never put personal interests above the company." When he hung up, Jihoon looked troubled. "Everything okay?" Nina asked. He sighed. "My father. He heard I've been distracted during this trip. Apparently, word got back to him that I've been spending time with someone here." Nina tensed. "How would he know that?" "The hotel manager probably contacted our corporate office. My father has spies everywhere." Jihoon ran a hand through his hair. "He thinks I'm not taking the business seriously." "Are you?" Nina asked quietly. Jihoon looked surprised by the question. "Of course I am. The Park Hotel chain is my legacy, my responsibility." He paused. "But sometimes I wonder if there could be more to life than just fulfilling my father's expectations." The taxi pulled up in front of Nina's apartment building, a modest complex in a working-class neighborhood. Jihoon looked out at it, then back at Nina. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" he asked. "I have a final meeting in the morning, but after that, I'm free until my flight leaves at 9. Nina hesitated. Getting more involved with Jihoon would be complicated. He lived in Korea. She lived here. His world was one of wealth and privilege. Hers was not. And yet... "Yes," she said finally. "I'd like that." His smile was worth the risk. The next morning, Nina woke early, her mind racing with thoughts of job applications, unemployment benefits, and health insurance. But beneath the practical concerns was a flutter of anticipation about seeing Jihoon again. She spent the morning updating her resume and researching open positions at hotels around the city. By noon, she had applied for 3 jobs, none as promising as the one Jihoon had mentioned at his new hotel, but Nina wasn't ready to commit to that option yet. Around 1 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text from Jihoon. "Meeting running late. Can we meet at 3 instead of 2? Nina texted back her agreement, trying to ignore the small thrill that ran through her at seeing his name on her screen. This wasn't a date, she reminded herself. Just 2 people with an unexpected connection spending time together before he returned to his real life halfway across the world. At 3, Nina waited outside her apartment building, dressed in jeans and a simple blue blouse, the nicest casual clothes she owned. When Jihoon's car pulled up, she was surprised to see him driving himself in a rented convertible rather than being chauffeured in the black sedan. "I thought we could drive up the coast," he explained as she got in. "It's my last day in California. I want to see the ocean." They drove north along the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean stretching endlessly beside them. With the top down and the wind in their hair, conversation was difficult, but the silence was comfortable. Nina found herself relaxing, enjoying the simple pleasure of the sunshine and the stunning views. Eventually, they stopped at a small, secluded beach. As they walked along the shore, Jihoon told Nina about his meeting that morning. "The investment group agreed to partner with us on the new hotel," he said. "It's a good deal for both sides. My father should be pleased." "But you don't sound thrilled," Nina observed. Jihoon picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. "I did exactly what I was sent here to do, secured the investment, represented the family, protected the legacy." He turned to look at her. So why does it feel so empty? Nina didn't have an answer. Instead, she asked, "What would you do if you weren't running your family's hotel chain?" The question seemed to startle him. "I've never thought about it. The company has always been my future." "Never? Not even as a kid?" Jihoon was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I wanted to be a photographer once. I used to sneak my mother's camera and take pictures of everything. People on the street, buildings, landscapes." A small smile crossed his face at the memory. "My father found out and said it was a useless hobby. He took the camera away." "That's sad," Nina said softly. Jihoon shrugged. "It was a childish dream. The hotels are my responsibility now." "It doesn't have to be one or the other," Nina pointed out. "You could run the hotels and still take photographs. My father would say that divided attention leads to failure in both areas." Nina looked out at the ocean, thinking about her own divided self. The dutiful hotel maid who kept her head down versus the woman who spoke 5 languages and dreamed of something more. "Maybe your father is wrong," she said finally. "Maybe being whole, honoring all parts of yourself, actually makes you better at everything you do." Jihoon studied her face, a mix of surprise and admiration in his eyes. "No one talks to me like you do, Nina. No one challenges me to think differently." The intensity of his gaze made Nina's heart race. She looked away, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how intimate this conversation had become. "We should head back," she said, taking a step away. "You have a flight to catch." Jihoon nodded, though he seemed reluctant to leave. As they walked back to the car, he said, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about not wanting my charity." Nina tensed. "I meant it. I know, and I respect that." He opened the car door for her. "But I have a proposition that isn't charity, it's business." Nina waited for him to continue as they got into the car. "My hotel chain needs someone to create a cultural training program for our staff," Jihoon explained. "Someone who understands both Korean and American customs and can teach employees how to accommodate cultural differences." "And you think I could do that?" Nina asked skeptically. "I know you could. You bridge cultures effortlessly. You understand people." He turned to face her. "It would be a consulting position to start, well paid with flexible hours. You could work remotely, but there would be some travel involved, including to Korea." The offer was tempting, more than tempting. It was exactly the kind of meaningful work Nina had always wanted but never thought she could have. "Why me?" she asked. "You must know dozens of qualified people." "Because I trust your instincts. And because—" He hesitated, then continued, "because I'm not ready for our connection to end when I get on that plane tonight." The admission hung in the air between them. Nina's practical side screamed caution, but her heart, the part of her that was Ellie Carter's granddaughter, whispered to take the chance. "I'll think about it," she said finally, "but I'd need to see a formal offer. Details about the position, the compensation, the expectations." Jihoon nodded, clearly pleased she hadn't rejected the idea outright. "Of course, I'll have my team draw up a proposal and email it to you." As they drove back toward the city, the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Nina couldn't help thinking about how different her life had been just 2 days ago. Safe, predictable, and small. Now everything was uncertain, scary, and filled with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine. When they reached her apartment, Jihoon parked but made no move to get out of the car. "My flight leaves in 3 hours, he said quietly. "I know." He turned to face her. "I want you to know that meeting you, these past few days, it's meant something to me, something important." Nina nodded, her throat tight with emotion she didn't fully understand. "It's meant something to me too." Jihoon reached out slowly and took her hand. His touch was warm, gentle. "Whatever you decide about the job offer, I hope this isn't goodbye." "It doesn't have to be," Nina said softly. For a moment they just looked at each other, both aware of the fragile connection between them, a connection that had no right to exist between a Korean hotel heir and a black hotel maid, and yet somehow did. Then Jihoon leaned forward and kissed her. It was brief, gentle, almost tentative, a question more than a declaration. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. Nina knew she should be cautious, should guard her heart against this impossible situation, but something her grandmother used to say came back to her. The best music happens when you stop worrying about hitting the wrong notes. So Nina leaned in and kissed him back, allowing herself to feel all the complicated emotions this man had awakened in her. When they finally parted, Jihoon rested his forehead against hers. "I have to go," he whispered. "I know." He reluctantly let go of her hand and started the car. "I'll call you when I land in Seoul." Nina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she watched his car drive away, Nina felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. She had no idea what would happen next, whether the job offer would materialize, whether their connection could survive distance and cultural differences, whether she was being incredibly naive to even consider the possibilities. But for the first time in years, she felt fully alive, fully herself. Back in her apartment, Nina played one of her grandmother's recordings, a song about taking chances and trusting your heart. As Ellie's rich voice filled the small space, Nina imagined her grandmother smiling down at her. "I hear you, Grandma," she whispered. "I'm listening." What she didn't know was that at that very moment, Jehoon was sitting in the airport, making a decision that would change both their lives forever. Instead of boarding his flight to Seoul, he was on the phone with his father, standing his ground for perhaps the first time in his life. "No, Father," he was saying firmly. "I'm not coming back yet. There's something important I need to do here first." He paused, listening to the angry response. "Yes, I know what's at stake, but for once I need to follow my own path." As he hung up the phone, Jehoon looked at the departure board, then at the exit. With a deep breath, he made his choice, turning away from the gate and walking back toward the terminal doors, back toward Nina, back toward the possibility of a life determined by his own heart rather than his father's expectations. Meanwhile, across the city, Nina's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown international number. It was from Mr. Park Sr., Jehoon's father. "Stay away from my son. Name your price." Nina stared at the message in shock, her momentary happiness shattered by the cold reality of what she was up against. Jehoon's world was so different from hers, and there were powerful forces determined to keep it that way. The question now was whether what had started between them was strong enough to withstand those forces, and whether Nina and Jehoon were brave enough to find out. Nina stared at her phone, reading the text from Jehoon's father again. "Stay away from my son. Name your price." Her first instinct was anger. Did he really think she was after Jehoon's money, that she could be bought off like some gold digger? She tossed the phone onto her couch and paced her small living room, trying to calm down. Just hours ago, she'd been feeling hopeful about the connection she and Jehoon had formed. Now reality was crashing down around her. What was she thinking? Their worlds were too different. His family would never accept her. Her phone rang, startling her. It was Jehoon. Nina hesitated, then answered. "Nina, it's me," Jehoon said, his voice rushed and excited. "I didn't get on the plane." Her heart skipped a beat. "What? Why not?" "Because I couldn't leave things like this between us. We need more time to figure out what this is." Nina closed her eyes, torn between joy at his decision and fear of the complications it would bring. "Jehoon, your father just texted me." There was a pause. "My father? What did he say?" "He told me to stay away from you. He offered to pay me off." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Jehoon spoke, his voice tight with anger. "I'm so sorry, Nina. This is exactly why I couldn't get on that plane. My father thinks he can control everything and everyone with money." He paused. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet," Nina admitted. "I was too shocked to respond." "Don't respond," Jehoon said firmly. "This is between him and me. Can I come over? We need to talk about this in person." Nina looked around her tiny apartment, suddenly self-conscious about its shabby furniture and peeling paint. But that was silly. If Jehoon was serious about getting to know the real her, he needed to see her real life. "Yes," she said. "I'll text you the address." 45 minutes later, there was a knock at her door. Nina took a deep breath and opened it to find Jehoon standing there, still in his business suit but looking rumpled and tired. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied, stepping back to let him in. Jehoon entered her apartment, glancing around with interest but showing no sign of judgment. His eyes lingered on the small collection of framed photos on her wall, mostly of her grandmother. "I like your place," he said. "It feels like you." Nina smiled despite her nervousness. "It's not much, but it's home." They sat on her worn sofa, the tension between them palpable. Jehoon reached for her hand. "I need to tell you something," he began. "After I left you, I called my father to tell him I was extending my stay in Los Angeles. He was furious. He said I was neglecting my responsibilities to the company." Jehoon's jaw tightened. "Then he said he'd heard rumors about me spending time with a hotel maid and that I needed to get my head straight." Nina winced at the disdain implied in those words. "I've never stood up to my father before," Jehoon continued, "but when he spoke about you that way, something in me snapped. I told him that who I spend time with is my business, not his." He squeezed her hand. "That's when I decided not to get on the plane." "What does that mean exactly?" Nina asked cautiously. It means I'm staying in LA for a while. I have a condo here that the company keeps for executives. I'll work remotely. He looked into her eyes. And it means I want to see where this goes between us without my father's interference. Nina wanted to believe it could be that simple, but doubts nagged at her. Ji-hoon, your father clearly doesn't approve of me, and if he's willing to try to pay me off, who knows what else he might do. Let me worry about my father, Ji-hoon said. I'm 32 years old. It's time I started making my own decisions. But your family, your company, will still be there, he finished for her. I'm not abandoning my responsibilities. I'm just claiming some space for myself. For the first time, there was something both exciting and terrifying about his determination. Nina had spent years playing it safe, and look where that had gotten her, fired from a dead-end job and living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe it was time she took some risks too. Okay, she said finally. So what now? Ji-hoon smiled, relief washing over his face. Now we get to know each other, properly, without hotel managers and family expectations hovering over us. Nina nodded, feeling a flutter of hope. I'd like that. Good, he said, leaning forward to kiss her gently, because I've never felt this way about anyone before, and I'm not ready to give it up. Over the next week, Nina and Ji-hoon spent every day together, exploring Los Angeles as if both were tourists. They visited museums and beaches, ate at small local restaurants, and talked for hours about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Nina learned that beneath Ji-hoon's serious businessman exterior was a thoughtful, sometimes playful man who loved photography and jazz and had a dry sense of humor. She told him about growing up with her grandmother after her parents died, about her college years studying languages, and about the dreams she'd put aside when financial reality hit. One evening, they sat on the balcony of Ji-hoon's company condo, looking out at the city lights. Nina had spent the day applying for jobs with little success. Any word from the places you applied to? Ji-hoon asked. Nina shook her head. Nothing yet, but it's only been a week. She hesitated. I've been thinking about your job offer. Ji-hoon perked up. The cultural consultant position? I had my team send over the formal proposal yesterday. Did you get it? I did, Nina confirmed. It's generous. Almost too generous. The salary was triple what she'd made at the hotel, with benefits and travel expenses included. The position sounded perfect, developing training programs to help staff at Park International hotels understand cultural differences and serve guests better. It's not charity, Ji-hoon insisted, reading her hesitation. It's a legitimate position that we need filled. The fact that you're perfect for it is just lucky coincidence. Nina smiled skeptically. Is it, though? Or did you create this position for me? Ji-hoon had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. The need is real, he said. How we structured the position might have been influenced by your specific talents. Nina appreciated his honesty. I'm tempted, she admitted, but I'm worried about what people will say, that I slept my way into a job, that I'm only there because of my connection to you. People will always talk, Ji-hoon said, taking her hand. The question is whether we let their talk stop us from doing what feels right. Before Nina could respond, Ji-hoon's phone rang. He glanced at it and frowned. It's my father. Again. He had been calling daily, each conversation more tense than the last. I should take this. Nina nodded and went inside to give him privacy. Through the glass doors, she could see Ji-hoon's expression darkening as he spoke. His voice rose, switching rapidly between English and Korean. Finally, he hung up and came back inside, his face grim. What is it? Nina asked. My father is coming to Los Angeles, Ji-hoon said flatly. He'll be here tomorrow. Nina felt a chill run through her. Because of me. Partially, Ji-hoon admitted, but also because of some acquisition deals I've been delaying decisions on. He ran a hand through his hair. He says he needs to handle the situation personally. What does that mean for us? Ji-hoon took her hands. It means things might get complicated. My father is used to getting his way, but I need you to know that I won't let him come between us. Nina wanted to believe him, but doubt crept in. Ji-hoon clearly loved and respected his father, despite their differences. How would he react when forced to choose? The next day, Nina was in her apartment, reviewing the job proposal again, when her phone rang. It was Ji-hoon. My father's flight just landed, he said without preamble. He's coming straight to my condo for a meeting. Do you want me to come over? Nina offered, though the thought of facing Ji-hoon's father terrified her. No, Ji-hoon said quickly. Let me deal with him first. I'll call you later. After they hung up, Nina tried to distract herself with job applications, but her mind kept drifting to Jihoon and the confrontation happening across town. What was his father saying? Was Jihoon defending their relationship, or was he being convinced to end it? Hours passed with no word from Jihoon. Nina checked her phone obsessively, jumping every time it buzzed, only to find spam emails or social media notifications. By evening, her nerves were frayed. Finally, around 8 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. Nina rushed to open it, expecting Jihoon, but instead found an older Korean man in an impeccable suit standing in the hallway. He had Jihoon's eyes and the same strong jawline, but his expression was cold and assessing. "Miss Carter," he said in accented English. "I am Tae-woo Park, Jihoon's father. May I come in?" Nina's heart pounded, but she stepped back to allow him entry. She would not show fear. "Where's Jihoon?" she asked as Mr. Park surveyed her small apartment. "My son is dealing with some urgent business matters," Mr. Park replied smoothly. "He doesn't know I'm here." That wasn't a good sign. Nina gestured to her sofa. "Please sit down. Would you like some tea?" Mr. Park nodded. That would be acceptable. As Nina prepared tea in her tiny kitchen, she tried to calm her racing thoughts. Why was Jihoon's father here? What did he want from her? When she returned with 2 cups of tea, Mr. Park was examining a photograph of her grandmother. "This woman," he said, pointing to the picture. "She is your grandmother? The singer?" Nina was surprised by the question. "Yes, Ellie Carter." Mr. Park nodded slowly. "I saw her perform once. In Seoul, 1978, she was very talented." Nina hadn't expected this personal connection. "Thank you," she said, setting down his tea. She loved performing in Korea. Mr. Park set the photograph down and turned to face Nina directly. "Miss Carter, I will be direct. My son is heir to the Park International hotel chain. He has responsibilities to our family and our company that span generations. His future is not his alone to decide." Nina met his gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Mr. Park, Jihoon is an adult. He can make his own choices." "Can he?" Mr. Park raised an eyebrow. "He has been groomed since childhood to lead our company. He knows nothing else. Nothing of struggle or sacrifice." He looked pointedly around her modest apartment. "Nothing of your world." The words stung because they echoed Nina's own doubts. "You don't think people from different worlds can understand each other?" "Understanding is not the issue," Mr. Park said dismissively. "The issue is suitability. My son needs a partner who can help him navigate the business and social circles he must operate in. Someone who understands our traditions, our obligations." He leaned forward. "You are an intelligent woman, Miss Carter. Surely you see that this infatuation cannot last." Nina felt anger rising within her. "You don't know anything about what's between your son and me." "I know my son," Mr. Park countered. "He has always been idealistic, romantic. It is why I must be practical for both of us." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a checkbook. "You have not responded to my text message, so I will make the offer in person. Name your price to end this relationship now before it goes any further." Nina stood up, trembling with indignation. "There is no price, Mr. Park. I'm not interested in your money." Mr. Park looked genuinely perplexed. "Everyone has a price, Miss Carter. It is simply a matter of finding the right figure." He wrote on the check and held it out to her. "Would $1 million convince you? You could start a new life anywhere you choose." Nina stared at the check, momentarily stunned by the amount. It was more money than she would earn in 20 years. With it, she could pay off her student loans, buy a house, maybe even start her own business. But it would come at the cost of her self-respect, and at the cost of what she and Jihoon might build together. "No," she said firmly, not taking the check. "I won't be bought off." Mr. Park's expression hardened. "Then perhaps you will be persuaded by something else." He replaced the checkbook in his jacket. "My son's position in our company is not guaranteed. If he continues this relationship with you, I will be forced to reconsider his future role. The board of directors would support me in this." Nina felt her blood run cold. "You would disinherit your own son?" "I would protect our family legacy," Mr. Park corrected. "Jihoon has a younger cousin who is quite capable. The succession could be changed." "That's blackmail," Nina said, anger replacing her fear. "That is business," Mr. Park replied coldly, "and family. 2 things you know nothing about." Before Nina could respond, the door to her apartment flew open. Jihoon stood in the doorway, his face a mask of fury. "Father," he said in a dangerously quiet voice, "what are you doing here?" Mr. Park turned calmly. "Having a private conversation with Miss Carter. How did you know where to find me?" Your driver told me, Jihoon said, stepping into the apartment, after I called every hotel in the city looking for you. He looked at Nina. Are you okay? She nodded, though she felt shaken. Jihoon turned back to his father. What did you say to her? Mr. Park stood, adjusting his suit jacket. I merely pointed out the realities of your position and offered Miss Carter a generous settlement to pursue her future elsewhere. Jihoon's eyes flashed. You tried to pay her off. Again? It is the practical solution, Mr. Park said, unmoved. This relationship cannot continue. You know this, son. You have responsibilities. My responsibilities don't include sacrificing my happiness to satisfy your idea of a suitable match, Jihoon shot back. Mr. Park's calm facade cracked slightly. Happiness? You speak like a child. Our family has built something that spans generations. Would you risk all of that for a woman you met 2 weeks ago? A hotel maid? Nina flinched at the disdain in his voice. Jihoon stepped closer to her, his hand finding hers. I won't let you speak about Nina that way, he said firmly. She is intelligent, kind, and more genuine than anyone in our social circle. She understands me in ways no one else ever has. Mr. Park shook his head. You are blinded by infatuation. It will pass. And if it doesn't? Jihoon challenged. What then, father? Will you really cut me off from the family, from my birthright? For a moment, father and son stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Nina felt caught in the middle of a battle that had been brewing for years before she entered the picture. Finally, Mr. Park spoke. You have a week, Jihoon. Return to Seoul with me and take your rightful place in the company or face the consequences of your choice. He turned to Nina. Miss Carter, I suggest you consider my offer carefully. It will not be repeated. With that, he walked out, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Nina let go of Jihoon's hand and moved away, needing space to think. I'm sorry, Jihoon said quietly. I had no idea he would come here. It's not your fault, Nina replied, though her voice was shaky. But Jihoon, he's serious. He'll cut you off from your family, your inheritance, everything you've worked for. Jihoon paced the small living room, agitated. Let him try. I have my own money. I have skills. I'm not a child who needs his approval anymore. But it's not just about money, Nina argued. It's your family, your heritage, everything you were raised to value. Some things are worth more, Jihoon said, stopping to look at her. What we've found together in these past 2 weeks, I've never felt so seen, so understood, have you? Nina couldn't deny it. There was something between them that defied explanation, a connection that had formed instantly and deepened with every conversation. No, she admitted. But Jihoon, I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. You wouldn't be, he insisted, taking her hands. You would be the reason I found something better. His certainty was both thrilling and terrifying. Part of Nina wanted to believe that love could conquer all obstacles, but another part, the practical part that had survived poverty and loss, knew that life wasn't a fairy tale. What if your father is right? She asked quietly. What if this is just infatuation? 2 weeks isn't very long, Jihoon. What if you wake up in a month or a year and regret giving up your family for me? Jihoon's face fell. Do you really believe that's all this is? Nina hesitated. I don't know. How can either of us know for sure? We're from completely different worlds. Maybe we're just caught up in the excitement of something new and forbidden. So, what are you saying? Jihoon asked, his voice tight. That we should end this now, that my father wins? I'm saying we need to be realistic, Nina replied, her chest aching with each word. Your father gave you a week to decide. Maybe we should take that time to really think about what we're doing, about whether it's worth the cost. Jihoon stared at her, hurt and confusion in his eyes. I thought you felt what I feel. I do, Nina said, tears welling up. But feelings aren't always enough, Jihoon. Sometimes life is more complicated than that. He stepped back, his expression closing off. I see, so you've made your decision already. No, Nina protested. I'm just saying we should take some time to think, to be sure. Jihoon nodded stiffly. Fine. Time. We'll take some time. He moved toward the door. I should go. Jihoon, wait. But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than a slam would have. Nina sank onto her sofa, tears streaming down her face. She had done the sensible thing, the right thing, so why did it feel so wrong? The next morning, Nina woke to a text from Jihoon. I'm sorry for walking out. You're right. We need time to think. Can we talk tonight? Relief washed over her. She texted back, yes, come over at 7. With hours to fill before seeing him again, Nina decided to visit the Golden Note Jazz Club. She needed to clear her head, and being surrounded by her grandmother's music always helped her think. David Kim greeted her warmly when she arrived. "Nina, good to see you again. How are those recordings working out?" "They're wonderful," she said sincerely. "I can't thank you enough for sharing them with me." David nodded. "Your grandmother's music should be heard. Speaking of which, I have something else for you." He led her to his office and pulled out a dusty file box. "I found these in our storage room. Letters your grandmother wrote to my father over the years." Nina's eyes widened. "Letters? I didn't know they kept in touch." "Oh yes, they were close friends until the end," David said, handing her the box. "I think she would want you to have these." Back at her apartment, Nina spent the afternoon reading through the letters. They spanned decades, from her grandmother's time in Seoul to her final years in Los Angeles. Through them, Nina discovered a side of her grandmother she'd never known. Her struggles with discrimination in Korea, her passionate love affair with a Korean musician, her difficult decision to return to America to raise Nina after her parents' accident. One letter in particular caught her attention. Dated just a year before her grandmother died, it read, "Sam, my old friend, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed in Seoul with Minho, if I had been brave enough to defy the stares, the whispers, the disapproval of his family. Would we have found happiness together despite everything? Or would the weight of two worlds colliding have crushed what we had? I'll never know, but I do know this. When I look at my Nina, I see a young woman who will someday face her own crossroads, and I hope, when that day comes, she chooses courage over fear, love over safety, the unknown path over the familiar one. Because the music that plays in our hearts only sounds once. If we don't dance to it when it calls, we may spend a lifetime in silence. Always, Ellie." Nina read the letter again and again, tears streaming down her face. It was as if her grandmother was speaking directly to her across time, giving her permission to take the leap she was too afraid to take. At 7 o'clock, Ji-hoon arrived, looking tired but determined. They sat together on Nina's sofa, the letter still clutched in her hand. "I've been thinking all day," Ji-hoon began. "About us, about what my father said." Nina nodded. "Me too. And I realized something," Ji-hoon continued. "All my life, I've tried to be the son my father wanted. I worked harder, studied longer, sacrificed my own dreams to fulfill his." He took a deep breath. "But when I'm with you, I feel like myself for the first time. Not Ji-hoon Park, heir to Park International. Just Ji-hoon, a man who loves photography and jazz and talking to a woman who sees beyond the surface." Nina felt her heart race at his words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." He took her hands. "If my father forces me to choose, I choose you. I choose us." Nina looked down at her grandmother's letter, then back at Ji-hoon. "I found something today," she said, handing him the letter. "My grandmother wrote it before she died." Ji-hoon read it silently, his expression softening. When he finished, he looked up at Nina with understanding in his eyes. "She was wise," he said simply. "She was," Nina agreed. "And she was right. I've been living my life safely, hiding my talents, avoiding connections because I was afraid of being hurt or disappointed." She moved closer to him. "But since I met you, I've felt more alive than I have in years, and I don't want to go back to just existing." Ji-hoon pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "So what do we do now?" he asked against her hair. Nina pulled back to look at him. "We take a chance, together, but we do it with our eyes open." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not asking you to give up your family or your heritage," Nina explained. "Those things are part of who you are, and I would never want you to lose them. But maybe there's a way forward that doesn't require you to choose between your family and your happiness." Ji-hoon looked skeptical. "My father made his position pretty clear." "Yes, but that doesn't mean it can't change," Nina said. "Maybe we need to show him, not tell him, that what we have is real, that it makes you stronger, not weaker." "And how do we do that?" Nina thought for a moment. "I think I should take the job you offered, not because of our relationship, but because I'm qualified for it. I'll prove my worth to the company on my own merits. And I'll return to Seoul with my father," Ji-hoon added, understanding her plan. "I'll take my place in the company, but on my terms. I'll show him I can be both a good son and my own man." "We'll be apart for a while," Nina acknowledged, her heart aching at the thought. "But we'll visit. We'll talk every day. We'll give ourselves time to be sure this is real, and we'll give your father time to see that I'm not a threat to his legacy." Ji-hoon cupped her face in his hands. "Are you sure? Long-distance relationships aren't easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," Nina replied, quoting another of her grandmother's favorite sayings. Ji-hoon smiled, then kissed her deeply. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. We have 5 days before my father expects an answer. Let's make them count. The next 5 days were a blur of emotion. Nina and Ji-hoon spent every moment together, talking, planning, loving. They went back to the Golden Note, where Nina sang one of her grandmother's songs on the same stage where Ellie had once performed. They visited the beach where they'd had their first real conversation. They took photographs all over the city, Ji-hoon teaching Nina to see the world through a camera lens, and they made love, exploring each other with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless, aware that each touch needed to sustain them through the coming separation. On the night before Ji-hoon was to meet with his father, they sat on the balcony of his condo, looking out at the city lights. "I've accepted the job," Nina told him. "I start in 2 weeks." Ji-hoon squeezed her hand. "I'm glad. You're going to be amazing at it. And I've decided to sublet my apartment and use part of my first paycheck to visit Seoul next month," she added. "I want to see where you grew up, meet your friends, understand your world." Ji-hoon kissed her hand. "I can't wait to show you everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both thinking about the challenge ahead. "Do you think your father will ever accept us?" Nina asked finally. Ji-hoon sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. He's stubborn, traditional, but he's not heartless. If he sees that I'm happier, more effective at work, more fulfilled because of you, maybe, in time." Nina nodded, hoping he was right. "And if he doesn't? Then we'll figure it out," Ji-hoon said simply. "Together." The next morning, Ji-hoon met his father at his hotel. Nina waited anxiously in her apartment, jumping every time her phone buzzed. Hours passed with no word. She tried to distract herself by sorting through her grandmother's letters again, finding comfort in Ellie's wisdom and courage. Finally, around noon, there was a knock at her door. Nina rushed to open it, finding Ji-hoon standing there with an unreadable expression. "What happened?" she asked, pulling him inside. Ji-hoon took a deep breath. "I told my father everything. About our plan, about how I feel, about who I want to be." And he was surprisingly quiet, Ji-hoon said, still seeming confused. "He listened to everything I said without interrupting. Then he asked me if I was sure about you, if what I felt was real." Ji-hoon's voice softened. "I told him it was the most real thing I've ever felt." Nina held her breath. "What did he say to that?" "He said he needs time to think," Ji-hoon replied. "But he agreed to let me try it my way. I'll return to Seoul with him tomorrow. I'll prove I can lead the company without sacrificing who I am, and in 3 months, if things are working, he'll reconsider his position on us." Nina felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a beginning, a chance. 3 months isn't so long, she said, though her heart ached at the thought of being apart from Ji-hoon for even a day. "It will fly by," Ji-hoon agreed, pulling her close. "And then, if my father still refuses to accept us, we'll make a new plan. But I won't give you up, Nina, not for him, not for the company, not for anything." Nina looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes, feeling the strength of his arms around her. "I believe you," she said simply. That night, as they lay together in Nina's bed, Ji-hoon whispered, "When I first arrived at that hotel, I felt so alone, so misunderstood. And then you spoke, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore." Nina rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I understood you," she murmured. "Yes," Ji-hoon said softly, and that changed everything. The next morning, Nina drove Ji-hoon to the airport. Unlike their first goodbye, this one was planned, purposeful. They had a strategy, a timeline, a commitment to each other, but it didn't make the parting any easier. At the security checkpoint, Ji-hoon held her tightly. 3 months, he promised, "and I'll call you every day." "Every day," Nina repeated, memorizing the feel of him, the scent of his cologne, the warmth of his breath against her hair. "I love you," Ji-hoon whispered, saying the words for the first time. "I didn't plan to. I didn't expect to, but I do." Nina looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and certainty. "I love you too." One last kiss, one last embrace, and then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of travelers. Nina stood watching long after he vanished from sight, her heart full of a strange mixture of sadness and hope. 3 months seemed like an eternity, but they had a plan. They had each other. And thanks to her grandmother's wisdom, Nina finally had the courage to dance to the music that was playing in her heart. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, Mr. Park was watching her from a distance, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. He had seen the way his son looked at this woman, the way she looked at him. It reminded him of something from long ago, a love he himself had once known and lost because he hadn't been brave enough to fight for it. Perhaps, he thought, his son was stronger than he had been. Perhaps that wasn't such a bad thing after all. As Nina finally turned to leave the airport, Mr. Park made a call to his assistant. "Find out everything you can about Ellie Carter," he instructed. The jazz singer from the 1970s and her granddaughter Nina. He had 3 months to decide whether to accept this woman into his son's life, into his family. He would use that time wisely, investigating, observing, considering. But for the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, Jihoon had made the right choice after all. 3 months could feel like an eternity or the blink of an eye, depending on how busy you kept yourself. For Nina, the days blurred together in a whirlwind of new experiences as she threw herself into her role as cultural training consultant for Park International Hotels. The job was everything she had hoped for and more. Her first project involved creating a comprehensive training program to help staff understand cultural differences between American and Asian guests. Her fluency in multiple languages made her invaluable, and her natural empathy helped her connect with employees at all levels. She worked primarily from the Los Angeles office, but traveled to other Park International properties across the United States. Every hotel manager knew she had Jihoon Park's personal endorsement, which opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed to someone with her background. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Seoul, Jihoon was keeping his promise to his father. He arrived at the office early each day, led meetings with confidence, and made strategic decisions that impressed even the most skeptical board members. But he also began making subtle changes. He insisted on a more diverse hiring policy. He implemented some of Nina's cultural training recommendations, and most shocking of all to his father, he started a photography club for company employees, even displaying some of his own work in the corporate headquarters. Despite the distance and the 12-hour time difference, Nina and Jihoon stayed connected. They video-called every day, morning for her, evening for him. They sent each other little gifts and long emails. Jihoon shared photographs of his childhood haunts in Seoul, promising to show Nina each spot when she visited. Nina sent recordings of her singing her grandmother's songs, something she had never shared with anyone before. As the end of the 3-month trial period approached, Nina prepared for her first trip to Seoul. Jihoon had arranged everything: a first-class ticket, a suite at the flagship Park International Hotel, a detailed itinerary of sights to see. But what neither of them had planned was the media attention. 2 days before her departure, Nina received a panicked call from Jihoon. "Someone leaked information about us to the press," he said, his voice tense. "There's an article in today's business section about the American woman who captured the heart of Korea's most eligible bachelor." Nina's stomach dropped. "How bad is it?" "They're calling you a former hotel maid and speculating about how we met. They mentioned your job with the company and implied you got it because of our relationship." "Well, that's partly true," Nina admitted, trying to keep her tone light despite her growing anxiety. "No, it's not," Jihoon said firmly. "You earned that position. Your performance these past months has proven that." He paused. "There's more. They found out about your grandmother." "What about her?" "They're connecting dots no one should have been able to connect. They know she performed in Seoul in the 1970s, that she had a relationship with a Korean musician. They're digging into her past, our past. It's like they're looking for any scandal they can find." Nina sank onto her sofa, her mind racing. Who would leak this information? Who even knew all these details? There was a long pause before Jihoon answered. "I think it might have been my father." The words hung in the air between them. Nina had barely spoken to Mr. Park since their confrontation in her apartment 3 months ago. Jihoon had mentioned that his father was being surprisingly cooperative about their relationship lately, even asking occasional questions about Nina. They had taken it as a positive sign. "Why would he do this now?" Nina asked. "Just when we're about to see if he'll accept us being together." "I don't know," Jihoon admitted. "Maybe to test us? To see if we can withstand public scrutiny?" He sighed heavily. "I confronted him, but he denied being the source. He seemed genuinely upset about the article." Nina wasn't sure she believed that, but arguing about it wouldn't solve their immediate problem. "So what do we do now? Should I still come to Seoul?" "Absolutely," Jihoon said without hesitation. "We knew this wouldn't be easy. We're not going to let some tabloid gossip stop us." His voice softened. "I miss you, Nina. I need to see you." "I miss you too," she said. her resolve strengthening. I'll be there as planned. Good. I'll have additional security at the airport, just in case there are photographers. After they hung up, Nina searched online for the article. It was worse than Ji-hoon had described. While it didn't openly criticize her, the tone was clearly questioning. How had a hotel maid managed to win the affection of one of Korea's wealthiest bachelors? What was her real agenda? The insinuations were clear. She was either a gold digger or being used as a publicity stunt. Some of the reader comments were even worse, ranging from racist remarks about her being black to classist sneers about her former job. Nina closed her laptop, feeling sick. She had expected some resistance, but not this level of public scrutiny and judgment. Her phone rang again. This time, it was David Kim from the Golden Note Jazz Club. "Nina, have you seen today's paper?" he asked without preamble. "The article about me and Ji-hoon? Yes, it's pretty awful." "No, not that," David said. "There's another article. About your grandmother." Nina's heart raced. "What about her?" "Someone's written a feature piece about Ellie Carter's time in Seoul. They interviewed musicians who played with her, club owners who booked her, even fans who remembered her shows. It's beautiful, Nina. It's a tribute." Confused, Nina promised to check it out and hung up. She quickly found the article online. It was indeed a glowing tribute to her grandmother, describing her as a cultural bridge between America and Korea, whose music had transcended boundaries of race and nationality. There were vintage photographs Nina had never seen before, quotes from people who had loved her grandmother's music, and details about her influence on Korea's jazz scene. Most surprising of all was the byline. The article had been published in Korea's most prestigious cultural magazine, owned by none other than Park International Media Group. Nina stared at her screen, her mind spinning. If Ji-hoon's father had planted the negative gossip piece about her, why would he also commission this loving tribute to her grandmother? It didn't make sense. Before she could puzzle it out further, her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed an international number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Miss Carter." The formal voice was unmistakable. "This is Taewoo Park." Nina sat up straighter, as if he could see her. "Mr. Park, I wasn't expecting your call." "I imagine not." There was a pause. "I assume you've seen the articles." "Yes, both of them." "Then you understand why I'm calling. The situation has escalated beyond my expectations." Nina frowned. "What did that mean?" "I'm not sure I follow." "The negative press coverage was not my doing," Mr. Park said firmly. "I have my suspicions about who might be behind it, but that is not important now. What matters is how we respond." Nina was surprised by his use of "we," as if they were on the same side. "And how should we respond?" "With dignity," Mr. Park replied, "and strategy." He outlined his plan. Instead of trying to hide Nina's visit to Seoul, they would make it official. She would be publicly acknowledged as a valued Park International employee visiting headquarters to present her cultural training program. She would attend company functions with Ji-hoon, be introduced to business associates, and be treated with the respect her position deserved. "What about our personal relationship?" Nina asked. "Won't people still gossip?" "Let them," Mr. Park said with surprising vehemence. "My son has fulfilled his promise to me. He has proven he can balance his responsibilities to the company with his personal happiness. And you," he hesitated, "you have proven to be an asset, rather than the distraction I feared." Nina was stunned by what sounded almost like acceptance. "Mr. Park, are you saying you approve of my relationship with Ji-hoon?" There was a long pause. "I am saying that I was wrong to judge you based on your circumstances, rather than your character. The article about your grandmother was my way of acknowledging that error." "You commissioned that article?" Nina asked, though she had already guessed as much. "After our confrontation, I began researching your family. Your grandmother was remarkable. Her courage in coming to a foreign country, her talent, her grace in the face of prejudice." Mr. Park's voice softened slightly. "She reminded me of someone I once knew, someone I respected greatly." Nina waited, sensing there was more to this story. "What the article didn't mention," Mr. Park continued, "was that the Korean musician your grandmother was involved with was my uncle, Min-ho Park." The revelation hit Nina like a physical blow. "Min-ho Park was your uncle? But that means—" "Our families have a connection that predates you and Ji-hoon," Mr. Park confirmed. "A connection that ended because my grandfather forbade it, just as I tried to forbid you and my son." He sighed heavily. "My uncle never married. He died alone, with only his music for company. It was a waste." Nina's mind was reeling. Her grandmother's letters had mentioned a Minho, but she had never known his full name or what had happened to him after her grandmother returned to America. "Mr. Park, I don't know what to say." "There is nothing to say, Miss Carter, except perhaps that history need not repeat itself." His formal tone returned. "Your flight arrives tomorrow at 2 p.m. Seoul time. Ji-hoon will meet you at the airport. I will see you at dinner that evening at our family home. Please be punctual." With that, he hung up, leaving Nina staring at her phone in disbelief. When she finally managed to reach Ji-hoon and tell him about the call, he was as shocked as she was. "My great-uncle Min-ho, the musician?" he said incredulously. "My father never talks about him. I barely knew he existed." "Do you think it's true?" Nina asked. "About him and my grandmother?" "It would explain a lot," Ji-hoon said thoughtfully. "Why my father recognized your grandmother's photograph, why he's been investigating your family, and maybe even why he's changing his mind about us." The next day, Nina boarded her flight to Seoul with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She had faced challenges before, growing up without parents, putting herself through college, enduring the casual racism and classism of the hotel industry. But nothing had prepared her for stepping into the spotlight as Ji-hoon Park's girlfriend, facing a media frenzy and meeting his formidable father on his home turf. As the plane began its descent into Seoul, Nina took out the small photograph of her grandmother she always carried. "Wish me luck, Grandma," she whispered. "I'm going to need it." True to Ji-hoon's word, there were photographers waiting at the airport, but Nina was prepared. Dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, professional yet flattering, she held her head high as she walked through the terminal, and when she saw Ji-hoon waiting for her, his face lighting up as their eyes met, everything else faded away. They embraced publicly, neither of them caring about the cameras clicking around them. "You're here," Ji-hoon murmured against her hair. "Finally." "I'm here," Nina confirmed, breathing him in, feeling whole again for the first time in 3 months. They drove from the airport to Ji-hoon's apartment in Seoul, a spacious penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Nina had only seen glimpses of it during their video calls, but now she took in every detail, from the minimalist furniture to the walls covered with framed photographs, many of which Ji-hoon had taken himself over the past 3 months. "Make yourself at home," Ji-hoon said, setting down her bags. "We have a few hours before dinner with my father." Nina wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "I still can't believe what he told me, about my grandmother and your great-uncle." Ji-hoon stroked her hair. "I asked my father about it this morning. He admitted that he only made the connection recently, when he started investigating your family background. Apparently, he found letters that Min-ho had kept, letters from your grandmother, like the ones she kept from him," Nina said wonderingly. "They really loved each other, and gave each other up because of family expectations," Ji-hoon added, holding her tighter. "I won't make the same mistake, Nina. No matter what happens tonight or in the future, I won't let you go." The dinner at the Park family home that evening was tense but civil. Mr. Park's large traditional house was filled with priceless antiques and family heirlooms. Nina felt out of place in the formal dining room, seated across from Ji-hoon's father, as servants brought course after course of elaborate Korean dishes. Conversation was stilted at first, with Mr. Park asking pointed questions about Nina's work for the company. She answered honestly, describing the programs she had developed and the positive feedback they had received. Gradually, the atmosphere warmed as they moved to safer topics: Seoul's architecture, changes in the city since Ellie Carter's time there, the upcoming opening of a new Park International Hotel in Singapore. After dinner, Mr. Park invited them into his study, a book-lined room with a large desk and comfortable leather chairs. From a cabinet, he withdrew a wooden box. "These belong to my uncle," he explained, setting the box on a table between them. "I found them after our conversation in Los Angeles. Inside were dozens of letters, photographs and small mementos, ticket stubs from jazz clubs, dried flowers, handwritten music sheets, and at the bottom, a small velvet ring box." Mr. Park opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "He bought this for her," he said quietly, "but never had the chance to give it to her. My grandfather intervened before he could propose." Nina felt tears welling in her eyes as she thought about what might have been, not just for Min-ho and Ellie, but for her own life if her grandmother had stayed in Korea, married the man she loved. "My uncle was never the same after she left," Mr. Park continued. "He threw himself into his music, became famous in his own right, but he never loved again." He looked directly at Nina. "Your grandmother. Was she happy?" after she returned to America? The question seemed to cost him something to ask, as if he truly cared about the answer. She had moments of happiness, Nina said carefully. She loved performing, and she loved me. She hesitated. But there was always a sadness in her, especially when she played certain songs. Now I understand why. Mr. Park nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. He closed the box of mementos and pushed it toward Nina. These belong to you now. A connection between our families that should not be forgotten. The gesture was unexpected and deeply meaningful. Nina looked to Jihoon, who seemed as surprised as she was by his father's sudden sentimentality. Thank you, she said sincerely. I'll treasure them. Mr. Park cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional moment. There is another matter we must discuss, he said, his formal tone returning. The future. Jihoon tensed beside Nina, reaching for her hand. Father, we've kept our end of the bargain. I've proven I can lead the company. Nina has proven her value as an employee. Our personal relationship hasn't interfered with business. I am aware, Mr. Park said, raising a hand to stop his son's defensive speech. That is not what I wish to discuss. He looked between them. The board meeting tomorrow. I intend to announce my retirement. Jihoon sat up straighter. Retirement? But you're only 62. Old enough to know that holding on too tightly to power serves no one, Mr. Park replied. I will remain as chairman, but the CEO position will be yours, Jihoon, if you want it. The offer hung in the air between them. It was everything Jihoon had been groomed for, everything he had expected to inherit, but not for many years yet, and not with so few strings attached. What's the catch? Jihoon asked bluntly. Mr. Park almost smiled. No catch. Simply a recognition that the company will be better served by your vision than by my outdated ways. He glanced at Nina. The world is changing. Our business must change with it. You understand this better than I do. And us, Jihoon gestured between himself and Nina. You've accepted our relationship? Mr. Park was quiet for a moment. I have come to believe that a man's strength is measured not by his ability to stand alone, but by the quality of those who choose to stand beside him. He nodded to Nina. Miss Carter has proven herself to be a woman of intelligence, dignity, and principle. If she is your choice, I will not stand in your way. It wasn't exactly a warm endorsement, but coming from Taewoo Park, it was revolutionary. Nina felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. Thank you, Mr. Park, she said simply. He nodded once, then stood, signaling the end of the conversation. The car will take you back to Jihoon's apartment. I suggest you rest, Miss Carter. Tomorrow will be a busy day. As they drove back through the nighttime streets of Seoul, Jihoon seemed lost in thought. Nina gave him the space to process his father's unexpected announcements, watching the city lights blur past the car windows. Finally, Jihoon spoke. Are you okay? That was a lot to take in. Nina nodded. I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. She smiled at him. Your father doesn't hate me. That's a pretty good start. Jihoon laughed, some of the tension leaving his body. No, he doesn't hate you. In fact, I think he might actually respect you, which is more than he feels for most people. He took her hand. But I meant the other revelation, about your grandmother and my great-uncle, finding out they were in love, that they were kept apart by the same kind of prejudice we've faced. Nina looked down at the wooden box in her lap, thinking about the lives that might have been. It's sad, she acknowledged, but also strangely comforting, like their story was somehow meant to connect to ours, like we're finishing what they started. When they reached the apartment, Jihoon opened a bottle of wine and they sat on his balcony, looking out at the Seoul skyline. The city was alive with lights and energy, so different from Los Angeles, yet somehow familiar in its vibrance. So, Nina said, raising her glass, CEO of Park International, that's happening sooner than you expected. Jihoon sipped his wine thoughtfully. It is. I'm not sure why my father is doing this now. He's always been so controlling, so reluctant to give up any power. Maybe seeing us fight for our relationship made him reconsider his own choices, Nina suggested. Or maybe he's just tired. Running a global company isn't easy at any age. Maybe, Jihoon agreed, though he didn't seem entirely convinced. The timing is significant. Nina raised an eyebrow. How so? Jihoon set down his wine glass and took her hands. I was planning to wait until later in your visit, to make it more special. But now, he took a deep breath. Nina, these past 3 months have only confirmed what I already knew. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. Nina's heart raced as she realized where this was heading. "Ji-hoon, let me finish," he said gently. "I know we come from different worlds. I know there will be challenges, but I also know that when I'm with you, I'm the best version of myself. You understand me in a way no one else ever has. You see past all the external things, the money, the position, the expectations, to who I really am." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, similar to the one they had seen in his father's study. But when he opened it, the ring inside was modern, stunning, a princess-cut diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires. "Nina Carter," Ji-hoon said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Nina looked at the ring, at Ji-hoon's hopeful face, at the city spread out below them. 3 months ago, she had been a hotel maid with hidden talents and buried dreams. Now she was in Seoul, being proposed to by a man who had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ji-hoon slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. Then he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness that had been building during their months apart. When they finally broke apart, Nina rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered. "And I'm so proud of you for finding the courage to be who you really are, not just who your father wanted you to be." Ji-hoon smiled. "I learned that courage from you." The next morning they attended the board meeting together. Nina sat in the back of the conference room as Mr. Park formally announced his retirement and Ji-hoon's promotion to CEO. The board members applauded politely, though Nina could see surprise and speculation on many faces. Then Mr. Park did something unexpected. He called Nina to the front of the room. "Miss Carter has been developing a cultural training program that will be implemented across all Park International properties," he announced. "Her work represents the future direction of our company, more inclusive, more responsive to the diverse needs of our global clientele." As Nina presented a brief overview of her program, she could feel the board members' initial skepticism giving way to interest and, in some cases, approval. By the time she finished, several were taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. Afterward, as people mingled over coffee, Mr. Park approached Nina. "Well done," he said simply. "You have a natural gift for communication." "Thank you, Mr. Park," Nina replied, still somewhat wary of his sudden support. "That means a lot coming from you." He nodded, then glanced down at her left hand, where Ji-hoon's ring now sparkled. "I see my son has spoken to you." Nina tensed, unsure how he would react to their engagement. "Yes, last night." Mr. Park was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My wife, Ji-hoon's mother, would have liked you. She valued authenticity above all else." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I have not always honored her values in the years since her death. Perhaps it is time I started." Before Nina could respond to this surprisingly personal admission, Ji-hoon appeared at her side, placing a protective hand on her back. "Father," he said cautiously, "is everything all right?" "Yes," Mr. Park said, his formal manner returning. "I was just congratulating your fiancée on her presentation and on her engagement." He bowed slightly to Nina. "Welcome to the family, Miss Carter. I trust you will bring to it the same intelligence and grace you have shown in your professional life." With that, he walked away, leaving Nina and Ji-hoon staring after him in amazement. "Did your father just give us his blessing?" Nina asked in disbelief. Ji-hoon shook his head, equally stunned. "I think he did, in his own way." He looked at Nina, his eyes full of wonder. "I never thought I'd see the day." The news of their engagement spread quickly through the company, and by evening it had reached the press. This time, however, the coverage was different. The official Park International press release described Nina as a valued executive and cultural consultant who had brought innovative thinking to the company's international operations. Her background was mentioned only briefly, with emphasis on her language skills and education, rather than her former job as a maid. Mr. Park had used his considerable influence to shape the narrative, and it worked. The tone of the articles shifted from speculation and insinuation to celebration of a corporate romance. Photographs of Nina and Ji-hoon at company events replaced the paparazzi shots from the airport. Even the more gossipy outlets focused on the positive, how they had met, though the details were kept vague, their clear affection for each other, and the company's bright future under Ji-hoon's leadership with Nina by his side. Over the next 2 weeks, Nina fell in love with Seoul. Ji-hoon showed her everything, from the grand palaces and modern skyscrapers to the small jazz clubs where her grandmother had once performed. They visited Minho Park's grave, leaving flowers and a small photograph of Ellie that Nina had brought from Los Angeles. They walked through neighborhoods where Jihoon had grown up, and he pointed out his childhood haunts with boyish enthusiasm. At the same time, Nina worked with the Seoul office to implement her cultural training program. The employees were receptive and engaged, especially when they realized she spoke their language and understood their customs. Many expressed surprise that an American could grasp the nuances of Korean culture so well. "My grandmother taught me more than just the language," Nina explained to one group of trainees. "She taught me that understanding begins with listening, with respect, with the recognition that beneath our external differences, we all share the same human needs and desires." By the end of her visit, Nina had won over most of the skeptics. Even Mr. Park had begun to warm to her, inviting her and Jihoon to dinner several times, and actually engaging her in conversation about business, music, and occasionally, when his guard was down, memories of his family. On her last night in Seoul, Nina and Jihoon returned to his apartment after a farewell dinner with his father. They were both quiet, aware of their impending separation. Nina would return to Los Angeles the next day to continue her work from there, while Jihoon would remain in Seoul to settle into his new role as CEO. "It's only temporary," Jihoon assured her as they stood on the balcony, looking out at the city. "Once you've finished setting up the training programs in the American hotels, you can move here, or I can split my time between Seoul and LA." Nina nodded, though she knew the reality would be more complicated. "We'll figure it out," she said, leaning into him. "We always do," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. "That's what makes us work, isn't it? We understand each other, but we also understand the world we live in, the compromises we sometimes have to make." Nina thought about how far they had come since that first day at the Grand Pacific Hotel, when she had surprised everyone by speaking Korean to a frustrated guest, how much they had both grown and changed because of each other. "I never expected any of this," she admitted. "When I first spoke to you that day, I was just trying to help. I never imagined it would change my whole life." Jihoon turned her to face him. "For the better, I hope." Nina looked up at him, at the man who had seen her potential when she was just a hotel maid, who had fought for her against his father's prejudice, who had given her the confidence to reclaim her grandmother's legacy and her own talents. "For the better," she confirmed, reaching up to touch his face. "Definitely for the better." The next morning, Mr. Park surprised them by coming to the airport to see Nina off. As Jihoon went to check on the flight status, Mr. Park handed Nina a small package. "For your flight," he explained. "Some reading material." Nina opened it to find a leather-bound journal. Inside, handwritten in both Korean and English, was a detailed account of Minho Park's life, including his time with Ellie Carter. There were photocopies of letters, old photographs, even music sheets with notes in the margins. "How did you put this together so quickly?" Nina asked, touched by the gesture. "I had help," Mr. Park admitted, "from old friends of my uncle, from music historians, from people who remembered them both." He paused. It seemed important to preserve their story. Nina understood what he wasn't saying, that he was trying, in his own way, to make amends for his family's past wrongs, to ensure that history didn't repeat itself with her and Jihoon. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "This means more to me than you know." Mr. Park nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional moment. "My son loves you," he said abruptly, "more than he has ever loved anyone or anything, including the company." "I know," Nina replied, "and I love him just as much." "Then take care of each other," Mr. Park said simply. "Success means nothing without someone to share it with. That is a lesson I learned too late in my own life." Before Nina could respond to this surprisingly vulnerable admission, Jihoon returned. He looked between his father and fiancée curiously. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," Mr. Park said, stepping back. "I was just saying goodbye to Nina, and reminding her that Park women have always been strong." He bowed formally to Nina. "I look forward to your return to Seoul, Miss Carter. Soon, I hope." With that, he walked away, leaving Jihoon staring after him in amazement. "Did my father just call you a Park woman?" he asked. "Before we're even married?" Nina smiled, clutching the journal to her chest. "I think he did." Saying goodbye to Jihoon was difficult, but different from their last parting. This time they had a plan, a commitment, a future mapped out together. And this time, they had something they hadn't had before. The blessing of Jihoon's father, and the knowledge that the path they were forging had been started long ago by two people who had loved each other, but been kept apart by the prejudices of their time. On the long flight back to Los Angeles, Nina read through the journal Mr. Park had given her, learning about Minho's life after her grandmother had returned to America. His music career, his philanthropic work, his quiet support of international artists. He had lived a full life, even without Ellie by his side, but the journal made it clear that he had never stopped loving her, never stopped wondering what might have been. When Nina reached the final entry, dated just a month before Minho's death, tears filled her eyes. "I heard today that Ellie is gone," Minho had written. "The world has lost a voice of rare beauty and heart. I find comfort in knowing that somewhere her granddaughter carries on her legacy, her spirit, her courage, her ability to cross boundaries with grace. Perhaps someday our families will find each other again, in a world more ready for such a union than ours was." Nina closed the journal, wiping away tears. Minho's wish had come true, though he hadn't lived to see it. She and Ji-hoon had found each other, despite all odds. And this time their love hadn't been defeated by prejudice or family expectations. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Nina looked out at the city spread below her, the place where her story with Ji-hoon had begun. So much had changed in just a few months. She had changed. She thought about her grandmother's words in that letter she had found. "The music that plays in our hearts only sounds once. If we don't dance to it when it calls, we may spend a lifetime in silence." Nina was glad she had found the courage to dance to that music, to follow her heart, even when the path seemed impossible. Because of that courage, she had found not just love, but her own voice, her own power, her own place in the world. As she stepped off the plane, Nina's phone buzzed with a text from Ji-hoon. "Missing you already. But this separation is just another verse in our song. The chorus is coming, when we're together for good." Nina smiled, touching the ring on her finger. He understood her, and she understood him, and in that understanding they had found everything. 6 months later, Nina stood in the garden of the Park family estate in Seoul, wearing a wedding dress that combined Korean and American elements, a modernized hanbok in ivory silk with delicate embroidery that echoed patterns from both cultures. Her grandmother's pearl earrings complemented the elegant ensemble. Around her, guests from both worlds mingled. Her friends from Los Angeles, Ji-hoon's business associates and relatives, employees from Park International hotels around the globe. Mr. Park moved among them with surprising grace, having softened considerably in the months since Nina's first visit to Seoul. David Kim from the Golden Note was there with his family. He had brought a special gift, a recording of Ellie Carter singing a Korean love song that Minho had written for her. It would play during the ceremony, connecting past and present, honoring the love story that had begun a generation before. As Nina waited for the ceremony to begin, Mr. Park approached her, looking dignified in his traditional attire. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "My son is a fortunate man." "Thank you," Nina replied, "for everything, for accepting us, for helping preserve my grandmother's memory." Mr. Park nodded. "I have learned that the strongest legacies are not built on money or power, but on love, on understanding." He offered his arm. "Shall we? Ji-hoon is waiting." Nina took his arm, moved by the gesture. With her own father long gone, having Mr. Park walk her down the aisle meant more than she could express. They moved toward the ceremony space, where Ji-hoon stood waiting beneath an arch of white and blue flowers. When he saw Nina, his face lit up with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. As the music began, her grandmother's voice filling the garden, singing words of love that had waited decades to be heard, Nina walked toward her future, toward the man who had changed her life by simply needing someone who understood him. And as she reached Ji-hoon, taking his hands in hers, Nina knew that their story was both an ending and a beginning. An ending to the separation that had kept their families apart for too long, and a beginning of a new legacy built on something stronger than tradition or expectation. A legacy built on understanding.